Thank you. Welcome everybody. I'm Councillor Judith Smythe, Chair of the Planning Committee. Limited public seating has been made available. However, this meeting is also being webcast to allow the public to attend remotely if they so wish. The public seating area is not in view of the camera used to webcast this meeting. Just some safety information. If the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and public gallery by the stairwells. Don't attempt to use the lifts. Please assemble by the turning circle at the end of King Henry Street, past the University Park building. And that's because we've got the ice rink there now. In order to comply with the Guildhall Trust's fire marshal regulations, anyone who signed in at the Guildhall reception desk should sign out when leaving the building at the end of the meeting. And also, I think when you do, exit in the event of a fire. Live web streaming. May I join everybody's attention to the fact that this meeting will be live streamed. Everyone speaking via microphone will be on camera, including those making deputations. Members of the press and public are also permitted to record the meeting on the understanding that it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those stating explicitly that they don't wish to be recorded. Anybody here not wishing to be recorded? Okay. Please can everyone use the microphones and remember to switch them off when they've finished, otherwise the camera will remain on you. If there's any voting, please can members keep their hands raised clearly until the number of votes have been stated. I now want to make introductions. I've introduced myself and I'll go straight to John first.
John Smith, Councillor for Eastleigh and Craneswater.
Linda Symes, Eastleigh and Craneswater.
George Fielding, Central South Sea Ward.
Gerald Van Jackson, Milton Ward.
Darren Sanders, Baffins Ward.
Russell Simpson, Hilsey Ward.
Thank you very much. These are all the members of the Planning Committee. And I'd now like to introduce the officers supporting us.
Good morning, Ian Maguire, Assistant Director for Planning and Economic Growth.
Kieran.
Good morning, my name is Kieran Laven and I'm one of the Council's planning solicitors.
Alison Harper, Local Democracy Officer.
Thank you. And we have two people here giving deputations, and I'll ask you to introduce yourself when the time comes. And I believe a representative of the Evening News, is that right? Would you like to give your name? Thank you. Okay, well, we'll start the meeting then. Just for clarification of proceedings, each agenda item will be presented in the following order. The officer's planning application presentation. Firstly, any deputations, 12 minutes in favour and 12 minutes objecting. Members' questions and comments, planning decision will then be made. We have one or two requests. We don't have any. Do we have any requests for deputations? I don't think we do.
If it assists,
there are deputations from councillors. There's one.
If it assists, we have deputations from the agents for each one of the applications, yes. And we are aware that Councillor Weems has produced a late representation in writing that he has apparently asked Councillor New to read out today.
But if Councillor New is not here, then anybody could do that, couldn't they? Okay, thank you. We do have some those deputations, but there aren't deputations from members of the public who are here. Good. So. Apologies for absence then first, please. I've got apologies from Chris Atwell, and I had an apology from Darren Sanders, but he's here, so thank you very much. Anybody else apologised?
Not an apology, but just to say I'll have to leave the meeting at 12:30 p.m.
Thank you for letting me know. Any other apologies, Alison? No. Okay, thank you. So we'll now move to the agenda. We have, first of all, the declarations of members' interest. Any member have any interest in these applications? No? Okay, thank you. Minutes of the meeting held on the 9th of November 2022. We have a copy which didn't come out with our packs. Just very quickly to go through it for accuracy. Page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Do I have your permission to sign these minutes, members? I will correct that on this copy and initial it in the usual way. Where is that exactly? At the very... Yes, I've got it. So I've just changed that and initialed it in the normal way, if that's okay with everybody. Right. So I'd like to move then on to agenda item 4, 259 Queens Road, Fratton. Ian.
Thank you. Let's make sure this works. Doesn't bode well. There we go. 259 Queens Road. This is an application for a change from C4 to more than 6-bed HMO. The site's currently licensed for up to 7 occupants. The application is described quite clearly, I think, in the report, so I don't propose to go through that in any great detail. It is one of an example of cases whereby the addition of one additional occupant, in this case changing the lounge, you can see here, into a bedroom, as you can see there, is not considered by officers based on professional advice to be a material change of use. Consequently, recommendation for unconditional approval. We would note, however, should it be relevant, the application otherwise does fully accord with all of your policies and guidance, notwithstanding the lack of need for plan permission on its own merits. Happy to take any questions.
We're going to make 2 decisions on this one. The first one is whether or not it needs... We're going to make 2 decisions on this. The first is whether or not the group of us as members think this needs planning permission, and the second will be whether or not, if it does need planning permission, we give it planning permission on its own merits. Meanwhile, we've had a presentation, and has anybody got any questions?
The applicant has a deputation.
Yes. Simon.
Morning. Morning. So I can confirm that at this stage the HMO licence for this property has been granted, and we're currently operating the property as an HMO for 6 persons, for which it has planning permission. We are waiting for the planning hopefully to be approved today, and then we can make some minor adaptations to the property for the conversion of one of the rooms into the 7th bedroom and ensuite, at which point we will increase the licence. I'd note we've never had an application for the licence refused. I can also confirm the property is fully compliant with building regulations. It has building regulation approval. This was given in conjunction with Hampshire Fire and Rescue Service. Importantly, we have also had a fire risk assessment carried out on this property, and there were no major alterations or improvements required, only minor recommendations for improvements, which is very normal and the job and objective of having a fire risk assessment. We've taken all of those on board, and they're all currently being actioned. Property benefits from rear access as well. The property is fully compliant with the SPD and building control. I recognise I've presented the last 12 committee meetings now, so I apologise for any elements of my deputation you've heard previously. Firstly, and most importantly, this property does already have planning for C4, and there are 66 properties within a 50-metre radius, 5 of which are HMOs, which falls below the 10% threshold, giving a threshold of 7.6%. The works carried out were carried out under permitted development, which is to say that the works themselves did not require any planning permission, and the only thing needed was planning for the building to be occupied by more than 2 unrelated people. I've just had confirmation that only one of the tenants in the property has a car at the moment of the 6 that we've got in there, which again is below the assumed number of tenants that will have a car. All of the rooms are above the size required, or at least 100% of the size required, including all the bathrooms as well, and this property also has a separate WC. All of the rooms have rented at a higher rent than expected, and obviously we don't determine the rent, the market dictates the rent, which would show that through economics these rooms are of a good standard and attractive for those that we've aimed them for. I think that's everything I want to say about this property, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Let's deal with first the decision we have to make about whether this requires a planning permission. And any questions, please? No questions? Okay. Shall I move straight then to comments and recommendations?
Thank you, Chair. I think it's really clear. My understanding is that planning permission for an HMO C4 is for 6 people or fewer. Therefore, it is clearly and absolutely plain that anything more than 6 needs a different planning thing, and therefore we have no choice but to make sure that they do come and ask for planning permission. And therefore I propose that we make sure that we do say that it has to come for planning permission.
Are you recommending it, therefore?
Yes, absolutely. Recommending that we have to take a view,
Yes,
not what the view should be.
I understand that. I'm going to
Chairman,
ask...
if I may, just to correct
Ian to,
the inaccurate statement, you do not need planning permission to add an additional occupier to a 6-bed HMO. That is the clear professional advice officers and lawyers are giving you on an individual merits judgment. So I can't say that's a universal rule. There are no universal rules. So consequently, I do have to correct the statement that's just been made that you definitely need planning permission. That is equally untrue. It is an individual judgment. If on the individual merits of this individual case, for a specific reason, you think adding a 7th person to a 6-bed HMO requires planning permission, you can make that planning judgment and express that and obviously have that tested should that be necessary. But if there is no universal rule one way or the other, it is a matter of individual judgment. The professional guidance we're giving you on that judgment is on its own cases. This one doesn't need planning permission. You're capable to come to your own judgment, but it cannot be based on a rule that they need it, because that's just not true and that would be unlawful. If there is some merits, particularities or specific circumstances of this one that means it does need planning permission, you can articulate those, record them in the minutes and then go on to judge the application on that basis, but you can't apply a simple rule, and if you did attempt to do that, you would leave yourself absolutely vulnerable to appeal with little hope of recourse because it simply would be an unlawful judgment.
Darren, I hope you're going to suggest this wording, although today I have the wording as well.
I'm so glad you do.
Sorry?
I don't. There is a wording that when we've used before has actually served us well based on the individual merits of each case. If you have it, Chairwoman, then I suggest say it.
George?
I think it'd be better to come from the floor than from the Chair's position to declare that, but I'm happy to...
Thank you, that would be better.
...state it. Due to the intensity of use of the accommodation, the impact on parking, waste, amenity impact on neighbouring residents and the impact on the Solent Special Protection Area, the changes considered in this case on their own individual merits amount to development requiring planning permission.
Thank you very much, George. That's, that would be the proposal, wouldn't it, that we declare, we agree that planning permission is required on the individual merits of the case for those reasons. If I say you're proposing that, is anybody seconding that? Darren, thank you very much. Can we move to a vote? Does everybody agree? Okay, we've agreed. Is anybody abstaining? Is anybody disagreeing? Thank you. Now we're going to move on to the deciding whether or not, having agreed that it does need planning permission, we should give it planning permission or not. You've said your introduction and that covers what we're dealing with here. Are there any questions about that? Linda?
No questions.
Okay. And your proposal is? For... okay. Is anybody willing to second that? Thank you, John.
Chairman, before we move forward, can I just be absolutely clear, because I was a little unclear whether you were going for an unconditional permission or a conditional permission. The committee, having resolved that this is development, contrary to advice, but that is your resolution, I would then be recommending you would want to look at some conditions. That would be obviously both the conditions and planning obligations for solar and special protection area mitigation, a time limit and an approved plans condition as a minimum.
Yeah.
Can I just check, is the building to the rear of the property to be used as a bike store? 'Cause it's unclear from the plans as to what that building is for.
Yes, the applicant has said that is to be used as a bike store, and it is existing at the moment.
It's existing, so we don't need to include that as a condition. Okay.
So would anybody like to propose the condition we want to put on there? Have you got them, George? I have them as well, but...
Yeah, it's the usual, the time limited one, special protection area, and within the approved plans. I think there's only 3 required.
It's the SPA nitrate mitigation, the SPA recreational impact mitigation, conditions on a time limit using the approved plans, and nitrate.
Yes, just to note, so obviously the SPA stuff obviously has a 106 associated with it, so it would be resolved to grant subject to the legal agreement, and 3 conditions, one associated with nitrates, one associated with time limit, and one associated with approved plans.
Thank you. Is that your proposal then, Linda? Yes. And is that what you're happy to second, John? Okay, so we have a proposal and a second. Do we have any contrary?
Can I suggest one more condition, that this is limited to 7 people? There are 7 bedrooms, that's what they're asking for, that we put that in as a condition.
What do you think has happened?
Not 14.
Members just obviously give you the standard advice that it is an unnecessary condition, as your licensing regime is the correct place to control that. One of the bedrooms, I think, no, 2 of the bedroom, 3, are large enough to take more than 2 people, so that is something you may should consider. But the recommendation is such conditions would not pass the test of necessity, but as always, it's for your judgment to whether or not you want to include such a condition.
You don't want to include that, okay. John, are you happy to? Okay.
So in which case, can I move that as an amendment?
Is there any seconders to that? 1, okay. Can I take legal guidance as to which order to deal with these in?
Well, rather than usually just deal with it by way of a formal amendment, I would just ask the proposer and seconder of the original motion if they're happy for that original condition to be imposed.
Would you be happy
within
for that?
their own resolution?
For that, would you be happy for that to be imposed? No. Okay.
Oh, you don't think it's necessary? Oh, okay, right, sorry. Well, in that case, you've got your original resolution on the table, which is without the extra condition to to limit the occupancy level.
So we'll vote on that first?
Yes, that
Okay.
motion may fail, it may pass, we shall see.
Okay. I'm putting it to you then, the motion, which is the motion with the conditions we read out before, but not with the conditions limiting the numbers. All those in favour, please raise your hands. Thank you. All those against? All those abstaining? Okay. So we have agreed that this should have the conditional planning application, and we'll move on to the next one. Thank you all very much. The next application is an application for 8 Baileys Road, and we have Carrie-Anne Wells to give a deputation after Ian has given his report.
Thank you. Before I present the application, this is one of 2 applications on today's agenda where we are aware that an appeal has been submitted to PINS, but we have not yet received an official start date. As a general point, I will just make for the minutes now. The resolution that is available to you, clearly, as that application may not start, it is technically possible. It's unlikely, they're fairly straightforward to validate, but it's technically possible. There is no certainty that the jurisdiction has been removed from you. So a resolution to grant permission today would allow us to issue a planning permission accordingly, and similarly a resolution to refuse would allow us to refuse planning permission accordingly. However, if we get that start and movement of jurisdiction from the Council to the Secretary of State prior to that decision notice being issued, then that jurisdiction would fall away from you, and whatever resolution you make today would then become an advisory guidance to the Inspectorate in the normal way as part of the appeal process. It doesn't in any way change how you assess or judge the application, so it's a matter of pragmatism based on the timing for it. Part of those timings are obviously linked. A resolution to grant would then need Section 106 and all of that tidied away, so that might take a little time, so it's entirely plausible that an appeal could start in that period. A resolution to refuse would be done much faster, but then obviously the appellant, one would assume, would wish to amend their appeal from one for non-determination to one for refusal. Something that obviously is available to them. I just want to make that clear for the minute, so that as those different sets of scenarios, irrespective of what judgments you make today, turn out, officers will obviously act within reasonable diligence to either issue a decision notice as quickly as possible or support the Inspectorate if an appeal does exist, either for non-determination or against refusal or the imposition of conditions, as the case may be. That seems the most prudent way of managing these sorts of scenarios, which applies to both this one, 8 Bailey's Road, and 128 Manners Road on today's agenda, and we've seen in the past as well. So rather than trying to put together a convoluted series of alternatives, members are able to make a resolution to grant or refuse planning permission today in the normal way, but how we then apply that resolution may change if jurisdiction moves away from the council. I'm just advising the committee of that, and having discussed this with legal services, that seems the most prudent way of resolving any uncertainty should the jurisdiction of PINS, the Planning Inspectorate, interfere with the issuing of a decision from this council due to the passage of time.
Thank you very much, Ian. Have you anything else to say about the report that you've given us about 8 Bailey's Road?
Yeah, to move to the application, then quite simply, so it is pretty much laid out in the report quite clearly. This is an area that has quite a few HMOs in it already. In our judgment, converting that study into a one-bed is not going to have any material impact on amenity or other relevant matters, and all of the space standards, of course, meet your HMOs. Converting that study into a one-bed also doesn't result in a material change of use in the professional opinion of your officers, and consequently the unconditional recommendation. However, if members come to the alternative judgment, as I say, we are satisfied it creates a reasonable living environment and would have no discernible impact on amenity or other policy concerns, and consequently in that circumstance a recommendation for grant subject to the conditions laid out towards the end of the report would be substituted. Of course, happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any, the deputation then, please, Carrie Ann.
Morning everyone. My name is Carrie Ann Wells. I'm sure most of you know that already. I'm the agent acting for some of the applications presented today. As you will have heard most of what I'm going to say previously, I'm going to keep it brief. Also to say that most of what I say will apply equally to the applications I represent today. At Apical, we are passionate about designing high quality shared homes for the benefit of your constituents. The clients I represent today share that passion. We have a growing reputation within Portsmouth for designing high-end, well-thought-out spaces designed for comfortable shared living for both students and professionals. All of the applications I represent today meet or exceed the high standards set in place by Portsmouth City Council. As you will be aware, Portsmouth size standards for shared homes demand some of the largest size standards in the UK, and at Apical we always strive to exceed that. We design shared homes for both students and professionals who cannot afford to get on the property ladder, and also for professionals who work within the city and are in need of accommodation. I urge you to fully consider the schemes presented to you today whilst keeping in mind the clear need for housing within the city. I cannot stress enough that all the applications I represent today comply with the local plan and all of the relevant policies. With respect to 8 Bailey's Road, specifically, all the bedrooms are over 10 square metres and provides 22.8 square metres, which meets the required standard when all bedrooms meet or exceed 10 square metres. The bathroom requirement is exceeded with the provision of 2 shared bathrooms and 1 ensuite with a further WC. Again, this application is fully compliant with the PCS 20, PCS 23 of the local plan and has obtained full building control approval. Therefore, I respectfully request you approve this application today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, again, we're looking at this in 2 stages. The first thing that you should be asking questions about is whether this needs planning permission and then moving to a recommendation on that. George.
Can I propose that, due to the intensity of the use of the accommodation, the impact on parking, waste, amenity impact on neighbouring residents, and the impact of the Solent Special Protection Area, that the changes considered in this case, on its own individual merits, amount to development requiring planning permission?
Is there a seconder for that? Thank you very much, Darren. Are there any other proposals? In which case I'm going to move straight to a vote. All those in favour of this application requiring planning permission for those reasons, raise their hands, please. Thank you. Now we'll move on to, having agreed that it requires planning permission, we'll move on to discuss whether or not it should be approved or not, or refused. Any questions?
Ian, could you let us know when this property got permission to be a C4, please?
Quite some time ago would be the answer, so I'll ask the team to have a trail through the records. We are satisfied that it is a current C4. How long that's been? So recently they sought and received plan permission for a change from a C4 to a dual use of C3 or C4. We were satisfied at that time, which was in 2021, that it was a C4, but obviously I'll ask the case officer to see if we have any more details about its longer history beyond that.
It would be very useful in the report to have when it got permission to be a C4, if we could have that in future reports, so that we do have the complete planning history, not an edited one. That would be very helpful.
Yeah, we may not always have that information, and obviously the relevance of it when we're producing a planning report, we need to look at that. So I'm not sure. We are satisfied that it is a C4 and has been prior to 2011, is the best of our evidence from the case officer. I'm not sure what more information than that
it would just be very helpful, and so that we are able to see, because there's very useful planning history in lots of the other of these reports, but just not in this one. So it'd just be helpful to have a complete view.
Thank you. Any other questions? If not, I'll move on to comments and recommendations. Gerald?
Happy to propose this, that this gets planning permission. It is licensed for 7 people, so I would put in a thing to say that a planning condition that the same number is reflected in the planning application as in the licence, so it is limited to 7 people.
It is. The report does, in fact, specify that it's for 7 people.
Excellent. So then
Already.
it'll be then it'll be easy to make sure that condition is acceptable then.
Would I have
Members, if I may say, I mean, I won't repeat this every time, but just so you're not misled by statements made in the chamber, it's no easier to accept that because the applicant has chosen that as a description. Such a condition is not considered professionally to be necessary. It is your judgment whether to impose that condition. Absolutely, I don't want to interfere with it, and clearly Councillor Vaughan-Jackson has made a motion including that condition, the first motion to be laid, not yet seconded, but don't feel that that is in any way a different position than the professional advice you've given. It's not a necessary condition, but your judgment whether to impose it, whether thus it is necessary, can obviously be applied by yourselves.
So would anybody like to second the motion that the motion that Gerald has put forward? Darren? Okay, thank you. So we have a motion before us, and do we have to we go to that motion first before considering any amendments, or do we consider a alternative motion first? Well,
it's up to you, Chair, if you want to invite further motions before going to vote. That's entirely up to you. I'd just like some clarity on the conditions we're actually seeking from this one after that back and forth.
Gerald?
So the usual ones in terms of the Solent Special Protection Area, that normal time frame for getting constructed. George, what was your third one? Sorry?
Time limit, approved plans, nitrates.
Yep.
And
if I may assist members, so if having resolved the needs plan permission, obviously officers can then give you further advice on condition. There is the legal obligation and associated condition for the SPA. There is a time limit of approved plans. They're effectively statutory conditions. Councillor Verne-Jackson has mentioned an additional condition limiting occupation to 7, and we have previously discussed bike storage conditions. In this case, it's our understanding that there isn't a bike store in place differing from the last one, so you may wish to consider a condition requiring the delivery of a bike store using our standardised wording.
Yes. Gerald, do you want to include a bike store?
Always. It is part of the council's policy.
So, is anybody seconding that extended conditional approval that Gerald has proposed? Anybody want to second that with the addition of bike storage? Darren? Okay. We will... There isn't a second proposal put forward by members yet, so we've got one proposal which is to approve this subject to the conditions including bike storage and limiting it to 7 people, and that's the only one we've got on the table. I propose, if you're all happy, to move that vote. All those in favour, please raise your hands. All those against? And all those abstaining? Thank you very much. We've given a planning permission for that, thank you. And we're going to use that as a recommendation to the inspector, as this is already the subject of an appeal. Okay, we're now moving on to item...
Sorry, Chair, can I just interrupt? Apparently Councillor New is running late, but he will come to the meeting.
Shall we postpone 84 Shadwell Road then? Yes, I propose that we...
Judith, on the deputations, Rob is also doing a deputation for 302 London Road as well.
Yes.
So we'd need to move both. Kieran, if we're all right, we need to move both of them.
I'm very happy to do that, to give him a chance to read out the deputations I have here already. So we'll move straight then, if we can, to item 5, 128 Manners Road. Ian, your report, please.
Thank you. Let me just find it in the paper. So this is an application for...
Page 29, members.
Simply a C4 to more than 6. In this case, again, this is an area, you'll see from the plans, that has a substantial number of HMOs already. This is another one, another application where we have a notification that appeal may or may not have started. So again, the same guidance as previously mentioned would apply. It's currently licensed for 7 occupants and otherwise complies with your SPD in terms of space standards. As you can see, so it's a study, you can see far right of that image, converting into bedroom 7. This case, and for that reason, and looking at the individual merits, doesn't require plan permission. In our view, is recommended for unconditional permission. Otherwise, in accordance with the guidance laid out in the resolutions to date, conditions would be imposed in the normal way. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. I've just got one, sort of probably a drafting question. On behalf of Birmingham Bunked, I don't understand what that means. As a Birmingham girl, sorry?
I think I'm correct in understanding it's probably Simon Birmingham. I think we've lost the first name of applicants.
What does Bunked mean? As a Birmingham?
Bunked is the company that
oh, is it?
he runs.
Okay. Thank you very much. It was very unclear. Question,
Chair,
Gerald.
we have a deputation
Oh, we
from
have a
Carrie Ann
deputation
Wells.
here, yes, of course. Thank you very much, George. We have a deputation here from Carrie Ann Wells.
Okay, with this particular property, again, all the bedrooms are over 10 square metres and it provides 26.5 square metre communal area, which exceeds your required standards. All bedrooms benefit from an ensuite. This application is fully compliant with PCS 20 and PCS 23 of the local plan and the Housing and Multiple Occupation Supplementary Planning document. It's also obtained full building control approval. Therefore, I respectfully request you approve this application today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now, sorry? I had a question earlier and it was clarified. I'm not going to repeat it. It was only on editing matters. Gerald, you put your hand up for a question.
I did. Sorry, and I got this wrong. I thought there were only one where the planning history didn't say when it became an HMO. And this is again an area of very high density of HMOs, so again it would have been very helpful to know when it became an HMO, but I presume we can't get that information now.
We know it became an HMO prior to November 2011. That's when we're on the records, but we've got that as far as it's relevant to consideration today.
Okay.
Thank you. Darren.
Thanks, Judith. Paragraph 5.7 is pretty clear about the space standards and the communal space. In the table above, you've got two sets for the combined living space, which is 22.5 and 34. And the communal living space means one and not t'other. Should there only be one in that table, Ian?
Take your pick. The applicable number is 22.5, as is quite clear, as you say, in the paragraph. Obviously, in this case, we do have at least one bedroom that is very close to that number. This is guidance. It's for you to apply judgment.
Sure.
We've checked these numbers. We're confident in them, so they're all above 10. So the 22.5 in accordance. If one was to do planning by numbers, one does not. One to do planning by numbers, it meets all your numbers. Professional guidance. This is a reasonable living environment, but to ensure you can apply your own judgment, which is why you're here, we've provided that additional information, probably in light of the fact that a couple of those rooms are 10.02 and 10.07.
Thank you for that. That's very clear. Thanks again, Ian.
Thank you. Any further questions? Right, I'll then move on to comments and recommendations. Gerald?
Do we have to do the first one about whether we have to have planning permission?
Yes, we do.
In
I'm
which
so
case
sorry.
the wording as said before.
Okay, so we're deciding now on whether it has to have planning permission. All those in favour?
No, Councillor, sorry, on its merits, what are you saying?
So exactly the same words as you used in the previous application.
I'm more
On
comfortable with
its
you
own
reciting it.
George, do you want to read it again?
Due to the intensity of the use of the accommodation, the impact on parking, waste, amenity impact upon neighbouring residents and the impact of the Solent Special Protection Area, the changes considered in this application on its own merits, on its own individual merits, amount to development requiring planning permission.
And a bicycle storage, there's none mentioned here, I don't think.
We'll come to that hopefully when
Yes.
we come to conditions.
Right, so that's in the next one. So will we have a recommendation that this does require planning permission for reasons pertaining to this particular application? Is there any alternative recommendations? No. Okay. Would you raise your hands if you're in favour of it needing planning permission, subject to the condition, those reasons? Thank you very much. Anybody against? No. Anybody abstaining? No. Okay, so we'll now move on to considering whether or not we want to grant planning permission. Are there any questions? Any comments and going maybe to the
Question,
decision?
does the application have any mention of a bike store?
Having determined that plan permission is needed, if member wish to grant it, certain conditions would be imposed. In this case, a condition requiring the provision of an appropriate bike store would be appropriate. Is there one, as there doesn't appear to be one in existence based on the case officer's advice to me.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Are we moving to a proposal recommendations? Gerald?
Had to propose giving planning permission with the usual conditions about timing, Solent SPA, and whatever the third one is, George, and approved plans, and that as this is licensed for 7 occupants, that there's a condition for maximum of 7 people. And bike store, but we just said bike store.
No,
and we wouldn't wish to be tautological, would we, George?
No, we said it because he asked a question about
Okay,
it.
fine, so no,
Demonstrating
okay,
we need a
so
condition.
add George's bike store.
Thank you. Do we have any alternative suggestions? If not, I will move to a vote. All those in favour of granting...
Who's the seconder?
Seconder, please. George, yeah. All those in favour of granting permission subject to those conditions? All those against? All those abstaining? Thank you. You have your conditional permission, which we will use to recommend to the Secretary of State, the Inspector. Thank you. Right. Don't see Councillor New, so we'll move on to number 6, 297 Powers Court Road.
Thank you. 297 Powers Court Road. I won't take you to the general. So this is, I think, the, if it's not the only, it's one of very few, yes, the only HMO in the relevant area. All the room sizes meet appropriate issues. It is the change of use of one room into a bedroom, and in this case, on its own merit, it's not considered to require planning permission. Unconditional permission is therefore recommended. Otherwise, if permission is required, then the normal suite of conditions would be considered to be appropriate. There's probably little more to say in this case, but very happy to take any questions.
Thank you. So, deputations, please. Simon.
Good morning. So, a lot of what I said in my last deputation applies to this one in terms of general mentions. In particular, this property, we have got building regulations approval. We haven't yet got the licence because we are waiting for this planning approval. We will apply for the licence. In fact, we have to apply for the licence. So as soon as this is done, we will do so. We will be providing a bike store as part of the completion of this property. As you saw, there's no other HMOs. All of the rooms are at least 100% of the size they need to be, and the communal space is just under 110% of the size it's needed to be. This property's been super popular in terms of prospective tenants, which I think is a great indicator, and we're obviously happy with the Solent special protection measures as well, and the approved plans. So any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Could I then ask for questions from the members? Gerald.
I just want to check I'm on the right application. We're doing Powers Court Road, and it says in the report that there are 4 HMOs, but both Ian and Simon has said there are no others. I just want to check that I'm on the correct report.
Ian?
If Ian brings the plans back up, there was at least another couple of HMOs in the radius, I believe.
Yes, I think there's one in the radius already. Apologies, I said this is the only one. There's that one also, and we'd have 2 down on Queen's Road as well. So, yes, apologies. This is just me transcribing my notes incorrectly. That's entirely no. In fact, it's me reading the next one. I was reading 281 New Road. Yes, there are 76 properties in this area, 4 of which are HMOs, 5.3%. As laid out in the issue. So thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Any further questions? Can I move to question? Thank you.
Thank you. On one of the letters of objection, there's a mention of mental well-being from one of the neighbours. How far is that neighbour in relation to where this HMO is going to be? I mean, are there a neighbour, for example?
I would have to ask the case officer to check. I would also be, unless we've been very clear on presenting it on with the neighbours agreement on the website, I'd be loath to state that in this public meeting, depending on the nature of those issues. Clearly, someone's mental well-being may be more or less affected based on their own personal circumstances, one of which is location. Others may apply, so I'm not sure, even if I did know, I'd be able to tell you in this public meeting.
It's just that one of the previous that we had, there was a great emphasis on obviously the mental well-being of residents, and I think it's very important with today. You know, with knowledge of today's mental health, that really be considered when it's being put forward.
In that previous one, those people had declared for themselves what the situation was.
If I can assist, Chairman, I say mental well-being is part of broader well-being, and indeed the relevant public health issues are relevant and appropriate for every single planning application. where the individual circumstances, and it might be a specific set of diagnosis or specific discussion with a neighbour has highlighted a specific problem, for example, one that could engage the public sector equality duty, additional work needs to be done for it, which we saw in a previous application where there was some specific individual circumstances. The general issue around the fact that disturbance and development, etc., may impact on people's well-being and change can affect on people's well-being is almost a universal in this case. The specific circumstances of this one hasn't been noted as requiring an additional or further assessment beyond that general one, which of course you're applying every time you judge a planning application when you look at the amenity, well-being and benefit and harm to the broader community.
Yes, it might be seen as used as universal, but just to make sure that when a letter like this comes to, that we maybe should investigate into it to get real clarity to consider.
I've just got a quick question. In the representations, it mentions that only 2 houses in Powerscourt Road received letters about the application and that no notices on lamp posts or in the window of the property. Can we make sure that future applications are better advertised?
The answer would be no. I have no particular evidence, and I've just asked the case officer to double check, that we didn't fully meet the notification requirements, whether that resident is aware of everything that may or may have not gone on. So I can reassure you that all due diligence is taken to fully meet the obligations for notifications. No, we don't send letters to hundreds of houses. No. That's not part of the process and never can practically be so. But yeah, there's, while that's obviously a concern a resident has raised, we've checked our systems and we are satisfied we did do a reasonable and proportionate amount of notification in line with the nationally prescribed requirements of local planning authorities.
Thank you. Any further questions? I'm not really allowed to take any further representations, so I won't. Okay, let's move then on to a discussion and
Can I make a proposal about whether this requires planning permission?
Yes, that's what we...
I would propose that due to the intensity of the use of the accommodation, the impact on parking, waste, amenity impact on neighbouring residents and the impact on the Solent Special Protection Area, the changes considered in this case on its own individual merits amount to development requiring planning permission.
Is there a seconder for that, please? Linda, thank you very much. In the absence of any other proposals, I will now ask everybody to raise their hands if they agree with that recommendation. Anybody against? Anybody abstaining? One abstention. Thank you very much. Now we can move on to the decision about whether to give it the planning permission that we think is required or refuse it. I'm excluding Darren Sanders from this particular... Thank you very much. So could I have any questions? Gerald?
I was going to make a proposal, sorry. I'll wait.
No, if there are no questions which I can't see, move to proposal.
I'm happy to propose that it gets planning permission with the usual conditions and with a limit of 7 people.
Councillor, you won't need that because it's within the description of development that it's 7 persons in this case.
Okay, so in which case just to make sure that's reinforced, would like that as a condition.
Yeah, so just to provide some clarity, members, again, obviously my recommendation is you don't need the condition at all. Being in the description is relevant but not enforceable. It's a judgment. The description doesn't provide an enforceable condition. If you, contrary to professional advice, feel that a condition for 7 is necessary, you can impose it, and as you've done on previous ones on the individual merits.
What do you propose, please?
That we put a condition on that's a maximum of 7. And that we have the SPA, we have bike stores, we have timings, and we have drawings. I think.
Thank you very much. Well, I think we all fully understand what those are. In the absence of, are there any alternative recommendations? Can I
Well,
ask you to a seconder for that first? George, thank you very much. And then we can move to a vote. All those in favour of that conditional planning permission, please raise your hands. All those against? All those
Abstaining.
abstaining, that's the word I'm looking for. Thank you. Thank you very much. You have a conditional planning permission. Welcome back, Darren. We've kind of excluded you from that discussion of that particular item, if that's okay. Moving to item number 281, New Road, which is on page 43. May I ask the officer to introduce the application?
Thank you. This is the one which is the only HMO, so apologies for the confusion earlier. So that's the property there, the only HMO in the 50-metre radius.
Sorry, I couldn't hear what you were saying. You may
So
need to
this
speak
is the
up.
one which is the only HMO in the 50-metre radius, 46 properties, one of which this one is an HMO. The only point of complexity, just to flag, otherwise it's exactly the same as the other ones we've seen, and consequently membership, the advice of this plan permission is not required. Or at least would not have been required if the plan permission for C4 use had been implemented. Based on the most up-to-date evidence provided by the appellant, they have plan permission to change from C3 to a dual-use C3, C4. That is still under construction, and consequently that C4 has never been occupied. There is a academic point of planning discussion about when that change of use would actually occurred, but as they were converting it for the purposes of a dual C3, C4, and while it'd be unusual to have 6 ensuite bedrooms in a C3 dwelling, it's not impossible. Different families have different needs, one would argue. It is the professional advice of officers that at this point today, this still is a C3 dwelling, albeit an unoccupied one that's currently going through a period of refurbishment. Consequently, and notwithstanding that described in the description, the judgment is whether the change of use of a C3 dwelling into a 7-bed HMO is appropriate. That does need planning permission, is a material change of use, but the scheme fully complies with your SPD for HMOs, and the recommendation is exactly the same, to grant planning permission, but with appropriate conditions, time limit, approved plans necessary, section 106, and conditions for the impacts on the SPA, and as it is still under construction, a condition for bike storage. So we've flagged this as a risk in the SMAT. From ongoing update, I can provide that confirmation. It is officers' opinion and recommendation today. This is a C3 dwelling, and the applicant, while they had an opportunity to make it a C4 between that grant and now, they haven't yet done so. So consequently, it should be judged as a C3 to 7-bed HMO change of use. Needs plan permission, but is entirely in accordance with your adopted policy.
Thank you very much for that, Ian. Simon, would you like to make your deputation, please?
Good morning. With regards to this property, it does have builder regulations approval. We are fairly significantly through the conversion of the property into the plans that were approved for C4 planning permission, but it isn't currently occupied, and therefore a licence hasn't yet been granted. There are no other HMOs within a 50-metre radius. All of the bedrooms and the communal space are over 100%. In terms of the SPD and PCS 20, the property, I believe, is fully compliant. We are going to provide, in fact, there is already a bike store present at the property. There's already an outbuilding which we intend to use as the bike store. And we will be having a fire risk assessment once the property's been converted. The conversion's been finished and prior to occupation. All of the rooms are of a good size and they're all en suite. The property did previously have a loft conversion, actually, prior to us carrying out these works. The only other thing that I thought I'd mention, which was relevant, is that we do have a waste carriers licence, so we take any additional waste from the property, and when and where necessary, we apply for additional bins at the property at our cost. We also have a cleaner visit the properties on a weekly basis to make sure that the property is free from any problems with regards to waste and rubbish. and thus far all of our HMOs are fully occupied once the works have completed, which is a good indication of the standard that we're offering, and the rents are increasing in line with market forces. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So this one, we're not into the territory of needing to decide whether it needs planning permission. It clearly does. So we'll move straight on to questions about the merits of this particular application.
Councillor, on that point, the report in front of you is drafted to say would require unconditional permission. So I think you still do, on the face of the report, need to go through that first step, yeah?
No, this one definitely requires a planning permission.
So
But you need to effectively correct the report, as it were.
Yeah, so if I can assist, so officers are correcting the report through this verbal update. So consequently, I'll take our advice from legal officers. I'm not sure that needs a vote. You can obviously disagree with my judgment and vote accordingly, but say certainly a minute recognising that officers have updated the report to say actually the description needs to change. It's not a change of use from C3/C4 to 7-bed. It's a change of use from C3 to 7-bed, and the recommendation needs to change. It's not unconditional permission. It's conditional permission with a time limit condition. SPA 106 and condition approved plans and bike store, because while there may be a shed there, obviously delivering it as an HMO bike store is a new provision. That is the new and amended recommendation that I'm verbally providing for you. Clearly, if members disagree with any of the planning judgments underpinning that, then you can take a vote and come to that conclusion. But if they're satisfied with the basis for that judgment, they can now go on and provide their own judgment as to whether that proposal is compliant with policy and should be granted permission with or without those or any other conditions.
So what you're really saying is you want to delete paragraph 5.4?
It's a little bit more complicated than that. It would be a total, yeah, it would need totally. So we've put both scenarios in most of the paragraphs so that you can see in that scenario if, and I'll draw one example in there. So we've covered a couple of times in certainly in section 5 where the different scenarios would apply. The key thing I'd say is, as is normal practice, the verbal update we provide in meetings and the minutes of that, and we'll be providing a full summary of what I've just said to Democratic Services to include in the minutes, is equally part of the guidance presented for you. Consequently, it is my advice you do not need to take a vote on whether this needs plan permission. However, if you wish to disagree with officers' verbal guidance that it does need plan permission because the change of use is C3 to 7-bed, then that would probably be worthy of a vote. But you can do one anyway. Yeah.
I'm just going to take a lead from the chair here. It seems to me that it's quite evident that this needs a planning permission, and it indeed, everything that's said about it, apart from the paragraphs that would need to be taken out, and I'm sorry they're in there, we should move straight to a decision about whether to grant the planning application or not. Are you all in agreement? Gerald?
Yeah, I'm agreeing.
Good, thank you. Thank you very much. So we're not going to compound the mistake that's been made in this report already by going to have a discussion about whether it needs planning permission or not. This is an application to change from a C3 to a 7-bed HMO, and it clearly does need planning application. Now we'll move on to the discussion of the merits of the case. Darren.
My comment had nothing to do with the merit of the case, but in my view that the paragraph you were referring to is actually perfectly clear and so does not need to be removed. In fact, nothing needs to be removed.
We're not suggesting we can remove things from the chair.
That was my question. So that was my comment rather than anything else.
But it says that the application site has already been granted planning permission to become a 6-bed HMO. It's not the case.
And the rest of that sentence, Judith, says, forgive me, Ian, and at the time of production of the officer's report, it is unclear whether it is already in lawful use as a HMO, which is the clause that I'm using to back up my view of the situation.
If I may assist, Chair, it has been given plan permission to be a 6-bed HMO. That is true. If they've just never actually occupied as a 6-bed. So and I would just take a small pedantic umbrage. There is no mistake in the report. The report stands absolutely. We're updating the report as Stan has just drawn our attention to. It was unclear. It is still arguably there is an uncertainty, but I'm sufficiently satisfied on the best evidence available now to give you good guidance that this is a C3 dwelling, if you refuse plan permission for it today, for example, they can still crack on and make it a C4 dwelling. They have that plan permission. But as it stands today, it's effectively a C3 dwelling going through a refurbishment that could either become a C4 dwelling under the old plan permission, or if you grant a new one today, could become a 7-bed HMO under this new application as well.
I understand that. Which is the best way and the quickest way through this for us as a committee?
I'll make a proposal from the floor that we approve conditional planning permission for this as it meets all the space standards under the conditions of time limitation, special protection area and 106, approved plans, bike store, 7 people.
Is there a seconder for that? Linda, thank you very much. Thank you very much, George. In the absence of any other recommendations, I propose that we all raise our hands or not. First, to approve this application, if you could raise your hands. Are there any against? And are there any abstentions? Thank you very much. Now moving to item 8 on the agenda, because we still don't have Councillor Robert New here. 118 Prince Albert Road. Ian.
Thank you. 118 Prince Albert Road. This is HMO says C4 to 7-bed proposal based on its own individual merits. Plan permission is not considered to be required. There is an anomaly within this scheme, which I will just take you to. So we currently have a 6-bed C4 HMO. You can see it there. That's what it looks like. You'll see in the middle of it, so far left image, the middle room, study room there. The applicant wishes to occupy that as a bedroom, which does not require planning permission. Members will obviously come to a judgment on that momentarily. What we have is a historic HMO that's been there for a very long period of time, and indeed it doesn't meet your standards, as a lot of older buildings will not. So what we have is a 6-bed, a C4 HMO, so can be occupied by up to 6 people accordingly, but the bedrooms are a little bit small in some cases, bedroom 7.7 metres, for example, and consequently the larger size, 34 square metres, is necessary to meet that requirement. However, the combined living space as it stands, as you see on this image, is 30 square metres, so it doesn't meet your planning by numbers threshold for a 6-bed HMO. Planning's not done by numbers, nor is licensing, and it has been deemed to be an acceptable living environment. It's been an HMO for some time, and consequently what we have is a acceptable but by numerically substandard scheme. The applicant has therefore proposed to numerically provide a solution to that by building a side extension onto the building there. So far left image you can see. That has significant adverse impacts on the study room that would now be a bedroom, in that you can see just about in the middle there. I'll try and highlight it on screen if I can. Is that appearing? Yeah, so this little tiny courtyard, you've got the bedroom window of the new bedroom there, a tiny courtyard and then a door into, so that door is obviously just for the purposes of cleaning and maintenance, and so you've basically got straight a metre, 1.2 metres in front of that window, a door into the living room. I suppose they could climb through the window for a shortcut to the living room if they really wanted to, but other than that, it's an enormous adverse impact on the outlook of their amenity that previously looked down the gunnel, the corridor at the side of the building. Consequently, this is not something that requires planning permission. That's a PD side extension, and it's not a material change of use to change that study into a bedroom in officer's opinion, so unconditional permission is recommended. If members determine that this does require plan permission, is a material change of use on its own merits, the scheme therefore continues to fail to meet your standards. The standards for communal space, of course, for both 6 and 7 beds are exactly the same. So the failure is binary the same, but it's failing one more person, the 7th person now, and creating arguably an unacceptable outlook. So consequently, members will have to consider whether to conditionally grant this plan permission, which meets your SPD for size, but arguably does not meet the purpose of the policy, which is to create good quality living environment, and therefore may wish to refuse plan permission, if plan permission is so required, on that poor quality living environment for a future occupant. As I say, plan permission is not required for the change of use, so officers are not recommending that, and you've only got a couple of bedrooms that are over 11 metres, and you do have the oddity, of course, that while the applicant has chosen for whatever reason, to show this rather poor bedroom, bedroom 1, with this poor outlook to achieve 7 occupants. Clearly, they could just occupy one of the 11 square metre bedrooms with 2 occupants and get to 7 people in a different way that wouldn't have that same harm, but that's not what they've shown on the plan, so I won't say the words own goal, but no, in light of that stated intention, members will need to consider whether this does create a reasonable living environment in light of the expectations that the plans have described, having gone through that first judgment, and if you wish to go contrary to officer advice about the need for planning permission. A somewhat circular set of explanations there, apologies, but I think worth doing so that members can understand the specific and unusual circumstances of this. You frequently see PD extensions to make larger communal spaces. This is an unusual one that they've chosen to do a sideways extension that, rather than benefiting all the residents, benefits the rest of them, but arguably has, as they've stated their intention to put someone hidden behind that side extension, somewhat detrimental to that one individual, and consequently, as that would be part of the proposed communal space, not part of the planning application, it's a PD issue, members will need to consider how that should weigh into their judgment. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Any deputation, please? Carry on. This is your deputation, please.
Okay, whilst this property has not been designed by APIC or PDM, I am the agent acting on behalf of the applicant today. In response to Ian Maguire's presentation, I just want to bring to your attention that this is an identical proposal as submitted for 331 London Road by another agent, which results in the same identical outlook for the resident, using the same side permitted development extension, and obviously providing the same outlook for the resident of that bedroom. The application for 331 London Road was recommended for approval by Mr Damano and was considered at Planning Committee May 2022, where you as members all voted to approve the application. To refuse this application today when an identical proposal has been recently approved by this committee is not behaving in a fair and consistent manner. This will then be considered appeal as a fully compliant application with a direct comparison of an identical approved scheme, all approved by you as members, presented to the Inspectorate, and I respectfully request you approve this application today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Shall we do the decision about whether it should have planning permission first? Darren.
I propose that due to the impact on the special protection area, the impact on the amenity of future occupiers, especially in bedroom 1, and the impact as a result on the amenity of neighbours and the 2 other things that we've talked about previously. I therefore propose that it does need planning permission. Ian, George has got the list in front of him.
Chairman, if I can assist, I think, Councillor Sanders, you may be conflating 2 issues there. Compliance or otherwise with policy has no relevance to judging whether planning permission is needed.
No, it doesn't.
First of all, we must decide whether planning permission is needed, and if it is, on its own merits, that there's a materiality to the change of use, one can then apply your policy, which is policy one applies to development. But if it doesn't need planning permission, then policy doesn't apply. So you can't use the circular argument, this wouldn't apply with policy, therefore I'm going to say policy applies.
We have the standard format of words.
That's fine. I'm tempted to go the standard format, but I know that Kieran will immediately ask for every word of the standard format. So therefore it is the standard format.
It's a lot quicker when you just say it, isn't it?
George can clarify, please.
Due to the intensity of the use of the accommodation, the impact on parking, waste amenity impact upon neighbouring residents and the impact on the Solent Special Protection Area, the changes considered in this application on its own individual merits amount to development requiring planning permission.
Are you happy to second that, Darren?
Yes.
As you proposed? Okay. So we have a proposer and a seconder, and if there are no other proposals, I'll ask you to vote in favour of that or against it, and we'll start with those in favour. Please raise your hands. Okay, so that's a unanimous decision because Councillor Simpson is not in the room. So now we'll proceed to a discussion about the application and its merits and its compliance with policy. And if there are any questions on that, because we haven't really asked questions on that, go ahead. I mean, I've got one question, which is that, no, I don't have a question. I've sorted it out in my mind. Any questions? If not, we'll move to recommendations and a decision. Gerald?
Can I propose we refuse planning permission for this? I think the idea that somebody in that small bedroom has an outlook that is so poor, and in a building where I think the other bit is that the communal space is not big enough. It seems to me it fails on two things. I'm sorry if we let another one through of similar size, but we shouldn't compound getting things wrong by getting it wrong twice, and therefore I would propose that we refuse planning permission for this.
Chairman, if I may, just to be absolutely clear, you can't have it both ways. Either they do the side extension, and they do therefore have enough communal space, but they'll have adverse impact on outlook, or they don't do the side extension, and thus they have an acceptable outlook, but they have insufficient communal space. There is no scenario where they both have insufficient communal space and a poor outlook. It's a PD extension, so you have no control whether they do it or not, but it's one or the other as the outcome. In which case, I
think the poor outlook bit, I think, is stronger and better.
If I, to assist members, the applicant shows the delivery of that condition. So if this was an acceptable one, we'd be recommending a condition saying require that extension. Yeah. But obviously, when you're requiring that extension, you're creating the adverse outlook and thus giving a reason for refusal.
Okay.
Thank you for that guidance. That's very clear.
And I'm happy to take the guidance.
Are you happy with the wording of that?
So you're looking to refuse purely on the basis of the poor outlook for bedroom one?
That the side extension, if produced, would mean that the outlook from that bedroom would be terrible.
Okay, Ian, does that give you enough to work with for a reason for refusal?
If members wish, the wording I've extracted from that is that proposal requires planning permission. Furthermore, planning permission should be refused as the proposed side extension would result in an adverse impact on the outlook and amenity of the proposed bedroom one, thus resulting in unacceptable living environment contrary to policy X, Y, Z.
Thank you very much.
Excellent.
That sounds excellent. Darren, do you want to say something?
No.
We have a seconder for that motion. Linda, you're still happy to do that. Can I ask you all to raise your hands if you agree with that decision? Thank you very much. Welcome back, Russell. Good. Now we'll move on to item 3, and we're going to do this.
Chairman, so obviously this is the one that we were waiting for Councillor New, who's still not here.
And I'm very happy for somebody else to read it out. It's written here. If somebody else would like to read it out, for 84 Shadwell Road.
I'm not sure it should be somebody from the committee. I think it is better if we ask the officer from Democratic Services.
I don't mind who does it. Are you happy? Anybody from Democratic Services happy to read it out? I'll give them both back to you because we hope to get through the both of them. Thank you very much. We have then here deputations first from this is 84 Shadwell Road. We have a deputation from Simon Hill first.
Can we have the report first, please, Chair?
Sorry, am I on the wrong one?
So,
no, you're on the right one. It's just
presentation
normally we have presentation from the officer before.
Presentation for the officer first. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. 84 Shadwell Road. So this is a C4C3 to 7-bed change for, you will see in the illustration there, there is a very few number of HMOs, this one, within the relevant area. It's currently licensed as an HMO for 5 occupants, so it's existing HMO provision. The proposal changes that lounge you see top left of the screen there into a bedroom, still having works undertaken to it at the moment. The application fully complies with all your policies. That change of use is not considered to be a material change of use, and thus unconditional plan permission for that basis, as it's not development, is recommended. However, should members wish to come to a contrary view, then obviously full of the full policy compliance, plan permission can be granted with the relevant conditions.
Thank you. Now we have deputations, first from Simon Hill.
Good morning. So this property has got building regulations approval. We have already applied for the licence. We're just waiting for that to work its way through, which takes a month or so normally. But we've no reason to suspect that it wouldn't achieve it. We've always achieved it so far. In fact, the owner of this property has another property which we've just completed, which again is almost identical, and that's obtained planning for 7 bedrooms. All of the bedrooms in this property are above the size they need. In fact, they're just under 120% of the size that they need on average, including some that are over 140%. The communal space, 115% of the space that's required. We are happy to provide a bike store and happy with the other conditions that have been implemented on the other proposals. There's only 1.4% HMOs within this 50-metre radius at the moment. As I mentioned previously, we have a cleaner go round to every single property on a weekly basis. 1, to check on the tenants, 2, to check on the property, and 3, to create a list of anything that needs to be actioned. You mentioned the mental health card quite a few times in terms of the consultations that are required and the thoughts that are needed to be given.
I'm sorry, could you just rephrase what you said then?
You've mentioned mental health in terms of the things that are required in order to support people with their mental health in terms of the neighbours and also in terms of the tenants. So with regards to the tenants in this property, one of the main reasons that we have a cleaner on a weekly basis is to make sure that we can check on the welfare of those tenants that are in the property, to make sure that they are safe and well, to understand any requirements that they may have in terms of anything we can do to support them. I recognise that we have an obligation, both morally and as our lettings team do, to support the people that are in the property. Fortunately, we haven't had any instances of anybody needing any help. That doesn't mean that we don't offer it on a regular basis, and we will continue to offer it moving forwards. I also wanted to update you on the application that you mentioned previous planning meeting with regards to the neighbours. We're looking to move forward with that in February, and we've actually already got quite a few things in place with the owner of that property to support the neighbours and to minimise the impact. So we do take it really, really seriously, and I want to make that point. So apologies if my phrasing wasn't correct. I think it is really, really important that we support those people, in fact, so yesterday I was in Waitrose and I took a photo with a gentleman in Waitrose because when I was at school he was a counsellor who I received counselling from for mental health issues, and yesterday I saw him for the first time in 15 years and took a photo with him because I recognise the impact that that's had on my life, which would probably be very, very different if I hadn't have received that help and support. So myself, I'm a huge advocate for that, and I think that's one of the reasons why we try and implement it in the HMOs. So yeah, in terms of this property, all of the bedrooms are oversized. It's only an addition of 1 bedroom. I don't think the planning department consider that to be a material change, and hopefully you consider that yourselves the same. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and for that clarity on what you said before. So I would now need to have the deputation read out. That's from Councillor Robert New. Councillor Williams, and it was going to be read by Councillor New, who isn't here.
Yeah,
Thank
the
you,
deputation is on behalf of Councillor Weems.
Yes, thank you.
Shadwell Road used to be a quiet road with a strong community of like-minded families. However, this has changed drastically over the years with the influx of flat conversions and more recently large-scale HMOs. Several residents have written to me to express their concern and anger that many of these developments have been signed off without a second thought to those who live nearby. Even within a well-managed HMO, there are negative consequences in the form of removing good family housing stock, an increase in the local population in an already high population density in the area, lack of parking provisions, increase in nitrates due to population density, and more relevant given the current climate, the limitation of the sewage and drainage systems. However, when an HMO is not well managed, which is sadly true of many, the negative consequences are endless. Specifically regarding Shadwell, where there are several HMOs, neighbours of these developments have witnessed one stabbing, regular loud fights and visits from emergency services, waste piled high in front gardens, untended gardens attracting vermin and continuous drug use, with residents' gardens filled with the smell of cannabis throughout last summer. I do welcome the new licensing requirements that will hopefully be coming into effect next year, but in the meantime, I feel for residents who will have to live next to these large hotels. Please understand that residents are not against HMOs if they are needed and if the rooms in the house are used similarly to how a family would use them. We can all agree this wouldn't be such a problem. But when a landlord is stuffing 6, 7, 8 and sometimes as high as 10 people into a small space, how can we justify that? How can these people have a good standard of living if they are sharing space with 9 other people? The simple answer is they can't. No one wins from these developments apart from the landlords who know they can make large sums of money for very little effort. Specifically regarding this application, I would draw the committee's attention to HMO population density in this area. When considering the 10% HMO density, it is important to not just look at HMO, but also include flat conversions as contributing to this statistic. This will clearly show why this development puts unbearable strain on the local infrastructure. Parking study. The officer's report repeatedly compares a typical family home with a large-scale family home. I do understand large families exist, but a typical family home does not include 7 adults. Furthermore, parking is a huge problem on this road. The whole area is really bad for this due to being purely residential, with each house effectively having just over 1 parking space outside and connecting rounds of Gladys Avenue and London Road having even less than that. 7 people usually equal more than 1 car. Thank you for your consideration today.
Thank you very much for reading out that, Alison. That was a submission made by Councillor Weems. Thank you. Now is the time, first of all, to us to decide whether this requires a planning permission or not. Do I have any questions or then proposals about this?
Should we do this bit first?
Yes, please.
I propose that due to the intensity of the use of accommodation, the impact on parking, waste, amenity impact on neighbouring residents and the impact on the Solent Special Protection Area, the changes considered in this application on its own individual merits amount to development requiring planning permission.
Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Russell, thank you very much. Shall we move to a vote in the absence of any other proposals, which I don't see? All those in favour? Thank you. All those, there's nobody against and there's nobody abstaining that I could see. Thank you very much indeed. Now we'll move on to the discussion of the this application and move towards a decision about whether to refuse or to give planning permission on this on its own merits. Darren.
I think Russell was before me.
Sorry, Russell.
Thank you. I feel like a broken record with this, but I really need to. I have asked nearly every planning committee, mainly because there's been so many HMOs within this area. Can we actually have a definite number of the amount of flats, legal and illegal HMOs within this road and area? Because it seems to be every time I come up and ask the question, how many is there? There's a big question mark, and if anything, 297 Palace Court is another example of, oh yeah, there is 4. We just got to know the real numbers here so we can make a proper assessment.
Chair, through you, again, to apologise for reading the wrong line on my table. That wasn't an error in any way from officers. That was my own personal error, reading one line on a table in my summary notes. So that's, I apologise if that's a necessary apology again, and in no way reflects the quality of your officers' output who work diligently to give you correct and accurate information. Can you have a definitive answer? No, I'm not in every single one of those properties. Someone could be illegally converting an HMO as I speak. I can tell you when we produced this report, we had total confidence in the numbers and took all reasonable diligence, liaising with our colleagues in private sector housing, asking local people through this process, asking ward members through this process, sending to ward members our HMO list to say this is what we think is going on in this area. In this location, 84 Shadwell Road, within that 50-metre boundary, there are 70 dwellings. One of them, 84 Shadwell, is an HMO, and they're wanting to add an additional person. 53 of them are C3 family dwellings, if you want to give them a name, and 16 are flats. That's on a table from our published records and was shared with ward members in the normal way so that we could see if anyone wanted to dispute those issues, because someone might have snuck in and put in an illegal HMO. So we are confident on this one. Can I give you a definitive answer for every street? No, of course I can't. That would be ridiculous. We don't go around proactively assessing the thousands and thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands homes in Portsmouth to find out how to do that. What we do is when we get an application, we draw the area of relevance, the 50-metre radius that you've adopted in your guidance, and we go and check those in a reasonably diligent way. So do I know how many flats, houses and HMOs are in locations? Yes. 53, 17, 1 in this location.
Yeah, of course, it's not done by road, it's done by the radius. I think really, I kind of feel there needs to be a bit of an investigation in this particular area. The reason I'm emphasising on it is because every time an HMO is applied, the residents are saying the same thing over and over again. I just think when you're getting that many residents, Henry Thorpe being one of them, keeps saying there's more HMOs, there's more flats in this area. I think we should investigate and actually find out exactly what's there.
And if I may, that's exactly what we do. I'm rejecting the criticism of the process here, and I'm doing that in a forceful way intentionally. We do not know where they all are. When people make application, and thus it's appropriate to apply the council's resources to do that additional investigation. One of the ways we do that investigation is to take that intelligence from local people where something's happened and add that to the list, so that every time that happens, we get a better list. And that is an ongoing and iterative process. The only way you're going to get better data is to go out, and I said I'd come to this, and survey every single property in the city. That has been done in 2021. It's called the census. We are expecting in January 2021 the outputs for housing and the relevant variables there, which will be another set of information intelligence for us to inform that. I'm not going to rely on it because I don't rely on any single form of data. When someone makes a planning application, we'll do the same diligent checking, working with private sector housing, looking at the site, talking to residents and ward members and checking those matters individually. We will also, through a recent resolution of this council, be rolling out additional licensing. This requires a further set of investigations and more evidence will be provided from the private sector housing team. They'll need more resource, and that more resource will be applied to gather more data, and that will provide, again, more outputs. It will in no way change the quality of the data you get presented here, because the quality of the data you get presented here is as good as you can get, because the individual small area, 50-metre radius, has been assessed both by residents through the consultation process, ward members through the notification process, and by your case officers to bring you accurate information. I cannot ever promise it's perfect, because there are human beings doing this work, but we are confident, as far as one can be, of these outputs. And as I say, we've got a list on our system that we do share with everyone to validate, and this information is good quality evidence to make these judgments. And the we do receive a lot of criticism for it, and if we were to not seek to validate this evidence and rely on historic, out-of-date evidence, I would accept that criticism. That's not the case. They are validated and updated in each and every case, and consequently officers do reject the criticism of the process.
Thank you very much. I think that's very, very clear. Darren.
Thank you. Firstly, a question, Ian. The report talks about a HMO licence for 5 people in February 2022. The applicant has been talking about a licence that's been going through for 7 people. I don't know what is the situation with regards to the licence at the moment, because the licence is granted for fewer people than were living in the property when it was applied for. So I'm a bit confused about the status of that.
To tie that up, so existing HMO, 5 people living there. The applicant has made a proposal, planning application, to change it to 7 people. That obviously needs a new licence to deal with that new 7 people. It's not licensable for 7 people today. It's a construction site. Once they've undertaken the physical works to convert it and explained to the private sector housing what any additional works they might need to do to change that as minor alterations that may or may not need plan permission, they will then be able to have it licensed for 7 people if it meets the private sector housing requirements. But it's perfectly normal to have a historic use for less than 7. This is a change. Whether it's a change use that requires plan permission is the question, but it's undeniably a change in occupancy, and consequently that new licence for 7 people would be sought once they know they've got plan permission to do it, and once they've done the work to meet the standards, because you're not going to say this building site is acceptable for 7 people. The house has to be finished and refurbished and furnished accordingly, and then that licence would be progressed for completion by the private sector housing team, I would anticipate.
Thank you. So if we were to limit the number of occupants here to 5 people, which is the number of the current licence, would we win on appeal?
No. You have to so I won't make any commentary on the necessity for plan permission. This is an application to require for 7 people. You can't put on a condition to remove the purpose of an application. If someone applies to build 10 houses, you can't put a condition on saying build 5 houses. You can refuse 7 people if you feel you have grounds to do so, or grant 7 people if you're satisfied, as officers are, that it meets your policy.
Thank you very much. Any further questions? Gerald.
Thank you, Chair. Could I ask through you to Ian, has Councillor Weems sent you any evidence of any additional HMOs within this area of Shadwell Road?
When I reviewed the case file last week, I hadn't seen any. I can ask the case officer if we have seen anything.
Okay, so it appears that the councillor, this is an area with very, very low numbers of HMOs, only 1. The councillor has not provided any information or any evidence of there being more than 1, and yet his deputation says that HMOs are causing complete chaos in the area, and I'm quite worried because it clearly can't be from HMOs. He's just saying it from his local residents in that area are causing chaos, even though they don't live in HMOs. I feel there's a disconnect with reality here.
I don't think we can speculate on that usefully. We probably need to go on and look at the quality of this application.
But I think I'm sorry, Judy, if somebody is saying that there are way more HMOs in the area than are recorded, because this is incredibly low numbers, 1, yeah, and saying there's a really bad effect on the local community, and yet has provided no evidence of any additional HMOs in the area, then I think we do have a right and a duty to call that out, because that's just scaremongering.
I think we're at liberty to do that in another forum, but it's not what we're here to do today. People are entitled to their opinions, and they're entitled to make deputations. He has made deputations very similar to this in the past. And
with no evidence.
I'm quite happy as Chair to write him a very quiet letter after this meeting, but I'm not intending to debate this further, this particular aspect. Are we ready to move towards a decision? George?
I'm going to propose that we give conditional permission under the conditions of a one-year time limit condition, requiring the development to be carried out in accordance with the plan submitted, the Solent Special Protection Area, bike storage, and limiting it to 7 occupants.
Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Darren. Thank you. Do you
Actually have a comment before you.
I'm so sorry. I didn't.
It's all right. I just wanted to want to summarise really that it's very clear that, and even though I understand what Ian's saying, I mean, I'm equally looking forward to the consensus. I think you meant January 2023, because I think it was 21 before. I'm also very curious to see when that will come in, as I do hope that it will reveal some other, we talked about other things, but it will reveal a lot of things from that consensus.
You're talking about the census, are you?
I'm just, in relation to our
Apologies, because it's the census 2021, details of which will be published in January 2023.
Yeah, that's what I meant, yes, sorry. And also I just wanted to finish off, just to recap what Simon said about the mental health. I have no doubt that you look after your residents that have mental health probably brilliantly. I was talking more about the residents that live near or next to. Okay, just to clarify that.
Thank you very much. Darren.
As someone who's probably had to deal with issues around all this for about 4 years, and who brought in a licensing scheme twice now, I have to say, I refuse to doubt the motives of anybody, at all. I may disagree with them, but I don't doubt their motives. I think one of the interesting things of Daniel's deputation was he talked about flat conversions in his deputation. And more than once, we've had people confusing the two things. That's not a problem. They're looking at the impact of everything on their area. So I won't criticise it at all. But it does suggest that sometimes, in some places, people are talking at cross purposes. The cumulative impact of HMOs and flats on an area is clearly a problem in certain parts of the city. I know I was talking to people about it in my ward over the weekend. But we have to deal with, Ian has to deal with, the planning people have to deal with, the licensing people have to deal with, HMOs. And it's bad enough. I mean, I'm in this weird position of being royally criticised from everybody, which is beautiful in one sense and daft in another. Landlords, tenants and everything else, for it not being perfect. And it's not perfect. I personally would love to have HMO restrictions in each street. But we as a Liberal Democrat administration didn't get that because the planning inspector basically told us you wouldn't get anything if you didn't do what they wanted. Bad, so we did it on a half-full basis. We're bringing in additional licensing because we know the evidence tells us that there are more problems with HMOs than there are in the rest of the private rented sector. We know that, the evidence is there. But what we have to do is navigate a way through people's often misconceptions of the situation, perfectly genuinely, confusing flats and HMOs, with trying to make sure we provide decent housing in the city. That's why we have space standards that, frankly, landlords hate, because they think that hang on, I'm going to finish in 2 sentences.
I just wondered if this was to do with the present application.
It's to do with issues that have been raised by the present application, particularly with regards to the confusion between HMOs and flat conversions, which is that what I'm now picking up are people that are actually conflating the two. And if they're conflating the two, that makes life harder. That also creates a whole raft of other issues for the planning department to deal with, or not. But it does mean that we, as Gerald has indicated, have to be really, really careful about how we mediate and navigate these things without doubting anybody's motives at all. And I think this deputation has just made our life a hell of a lot harder, and I know that's 4 sentences, Judith. Thank you.
Thank you. think that was useful in terms of our policy making, but I'm still not sure how relevant it is to the consideration of this present application. We have a recommendation now put by George Fielding and seconded by, I think, who seconded that? Darren, you did. It's in the absence of any other recommendations, can I ask you to raise your hands if you agree with that recommendation? Thank you very much. If you disagree, could you raise your hands? And if you're abstaining, please raise your hands. Thank you very much. Right. I'm so sorry. We're moving on to the last application today, and I'm not taking a break today because I think we should be able to get there unless anybody's absolutely desperate. Okay, we'll move on then. The next item on the agenda is 302 London Road. Carrie-Anne Wells is going to make a deputation after we've heard from the officer.
Thank you. 302 London Road. This is the one case today where jurisdiction has moved to Planning Inspectorate, so you're not making a resolution to determine the application, but to advise the Planning Inspector what one would have done in this circumstance. Change of use, C4 to sui generis use. We have very small number of HMOs in the locality at the moment. I think it's 2 out of 89. It's the change of use of the middle bedroom there from a lounge to a bedroom. Some images, as always, to look at. The application fully accords with all your policy, if that would be relevant. The change of use is not considered to be material and plan permission therefore not required, but should members come to that contrary view, as I say, fully compliant with your SPD, and in fact I think this one has some particularly generous room sizes throughout, and as you can see furnished to high quality in these images as well, should that be relevant. 2 letters of representation, and we do have that written representation from Councillor Weems as well, Chairman.
Thank you very much. So I'd now like the applicant, Carrie-Anne Wells, to start off with your deputation.
Thank you. As you can see from the photos, this property has been finished to an exceptionally high standard. All the bedrooms are significantly over 10 square metres, all with en-suites. This requires the communal area to be just 22.5 square metres, yet the applicant has chosen to provide 40.94 square metres. This application is fully compliant with PCS 20 and PCS 23 of the local plan and the Housing Multiple Occupation Supplementary Planning Document, and has obtained all building control approval. Therefore, I respectfully request you recommend this application for approval to the Inspectorate today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we have a further deputation to be read out by Councillor New, who's not here, from Councillor Weems. Thank you, Alison.
Okay. Apologies to the committee, but I'm unable to attend today's meeting, but I would be grateful if members could look into the above application with the usual precision and depth of thinking. I understand that due to the application being undetermined, the committee is unable to make a decision on this application, but rather must make a recommendation as to whether they would grant permission for the scheme, which will be put to the planning inspector. This gives the committee the unique opportunity to test what is feasible to the planning inspector. As outlined in the report, this application sits on one of the arteries of the city. There is no parking, there is excessive noise pollution, constant traffic from cyclists, buses, e-scooters and pedestrians close to the property. Section 5.7 speaks about amenity and parking, with Section 5.9 stating the minor increase of occupants is not considered to have a demonstrable impact on the parking need and thus parking availability in the wider area. It is noted that the Council's adopted parking standards within the associated SPD has the same expectation for the number of parking spaces, 2 spaces per dwelling for any scale of HMO with 4 or more dwellings. I would be interested to know how many people in this property use a vehicle. I imagine it's more than the policy gives. Furthermore, pushing an extra person into a house with very little light and very little ventilation is not something I can support. It shows greed more than anything else. Why is 6 people not enough to the applicant? What does a 7th person achieve for those living in this property? I have lived in HMOs with over 5 people. They're frankly bloody awful. The properties in this city do not cater to that amount of people living under one roof. I know that some on this committee have too lived in HMOs and can empathise with these thoughts. Thank you for your consideration today.
Thank you for reading that out. Thank you very much. So we, I think, now need to move to the point of deciding whether or not this needs a planning permission or not. Is our members happy to consider that first before questions? Or have you got any questions on that point? Okay, in which case?
Can I propose that due to the intensity of the use of the accommodation, the impact on parking, waste, amenity impact on neighbouring residents and the impact on the Solent Special Protection Area, the changes considered in this case on its own individual merits amount to development requiring planning permission?
Is there a seconder for that? Linda, thank you. In the absence of any other votes on this particular issue that we're dealing with at the moment, could I ask you to raise your hands if you agree? Thank you, that's unanimous. We now move on to consider the merits of this planning application that we're considering. And are there any questions for the officer, Chief Planning Officer here? John.
Just a note, really, but what was in the representations? It said about fire risk. From the pictures and the images, it all looks to be compliant. But what was the point about fire risk?
From recollection, it was simply one of the 2 letters that we had listed general concerns about HMOs rather than, I think, a specific concern that there is a failure to comply with a fire control in this case. And obviously, higher densities have different fire risk implications than lower densities.
Thank you. Any other questions? Can you move on to comments and recommendations, please? George?
This one obviously does exceed our minimum space standards quite considerably, and from the pictures that's shown look to be of a good standard. I would therefore propose that we give conditional planning permission with the conditions relating to time limitation, approved plans, Solent Special Protection Area, bike store, and limiting it to 7 occupants.
Do I have a seconder for that? John, thank you very much.
Chairman, if I can provide some advice, bike store point of view, I think there may be a bike store there, but I don't have entire clarity on that, so the condition is probably a harmless one. I would just make a comment on the 7-bedroom, so not talking to the legality of the necessity, which I think I've given you sufficient advice on. As noted, the size standards for this one are abnormally large. This isn't one which is bumping along the bottom. Your adopted policy for space standards for 8, 9, 10 is the same as it is for 6. And similarly, this obviously greatly exceeds that in any case. Consequently, as all planning conditions not only have to be necessary from a legal perspective, also have to be relevant and proportionate to the scheme from which they're suggested, I would suggest you may wish to minute why, in this case, there is a need to limit that occupancy to 7 people, and if they chose to put 2 people in one of these large bedrooms, for example, and you have 8 people enjoying that 40-plus metre communal space, which is not far off twice your requirement, why that's a reasonably required condition. And the other ones, I don't feel any of them are being required, but there are limitations and crowding 7 people into a space that is only just fit for 6 to 10. But this is a very large HMO, and consequently I would invite you to consider whether you have in your own minds, and thus articulate for the minutes, justified why that condition is exceptionally necessary in light of the space standards you've adopted and the space provided in this property.
John, any further
That's
thoughts?
fair, I think, in my opinion. And I've seconded it, so I would say that was fair.
So what are you proposing?
Well, I would propose that we open that up to more than that. I think that's fair what Ian's just said.
So you're not seconding that motion? Thank you. George?
I'd stick with my original proposal, primarily because the application specifically states that it's for 7 individuals to live together in an HMO, and we are looking at non-intensifying the area in terms of amenities, so I'm sticking with my original proposal.
Okay. I
just
mean,
for
of course, the
clar-
permission is according to plans anyway.
Yeah, so for clarity,
So we're
while,
already covered.
while they're listed 7 bedrooms, the application is changing of use from C4 to more than 6. That's the description, top of page 23.
Oh, yes, so it is, yes. Yep. Okay. Darren?
If John won't second what George wants, I will.
Thank you very much. Any further discussion of this? Okay, so we have a recommendation to approve it with a additional condition that we want to limit the occupancy to 7 people, 7 bedrooms. And can I ask you to raise your hands if you're in favour of that? If you're against that, please raise your hands. And if you want to abstain, please raise your hands. Thank you very much. I think we're now done with today's business, and I'd like to thank everybody for participating so effectively today, and also thank our officers for providing advice and supporting us in the meeting today. And I think we have one more meeting before Christmas, don't we? So I won't give people seasonal greetings today. Thank you all very much. Thank you.